These days, when you go out to see a blockbuster movie, you expect a post-credit scene. That's just how it is. In a world dominated by comic book films, it's often what happens during and even after the credits that actually matters. That's not the case when it comes to video games, but there is one notable exception that I want to talk about. It's a 1990 shoot-'em-up called Final Blaster, and what happens after the credits is arguably more interesting and impactful than the real ending. Turn back now if you don't want to know what happens next, because today we're going to spoil the story and ending for Final Blaster on the PC Engine. This is Game Over, the early years. Before we talk about Final Blaster and its post-credit scene, we first need to go all the way back to 1981 and look at a largely forgotten Namco shooter named Bosconian. While not as popular as Space Invaders and a lot of the other shoot-'em-ups of that era, Bosconian shook up the formula by allowing players to fly through space in 8 directions, creating a large playfield to fight in. It's a lot of fun and worth going back to, especially if you've already played its more popular peers. Unfortunately, Bosconian didn't really have much of an ending. It's the kind of early arcade game where simply earning a high score is a lot more important than watching the story play out. The same is also true of Bosconian 87, a revised port that hit the ZX Spectrum in, you guessed it, 1987. Once again, a complicated story with a satisfying ending was basically the last thing on the developer's mind, leaving us with a fun shooter that, under most circumstances, would have no reason to be in a Game Over episode. Now, 2 years after Bosconian 87 came out, Namco is back with a proper arcade sequel named Blastoff. This follow-up decided to refocus the franchise away from flying around in a massive level, opting instead to play out like a traditional vertical shoot-'em-up. While certainly not as unique as its predecessor, the game is still a lot of fun, and it even uses some of the familiar enemies and bosses from the old games. Best of all, it has an ending! I mean, it's basically just a ship flying away from an enemy planet while it explodes in the background, but at least it's an ending. Honestly, the most noteworthy thing here is that the planet is a spitting image of the Death Star before it was blown up. And then, after you destroyed the planet, it looks almost exactly like an unfinished Death Star from Return of the Jedi. I mean, that's clearly what they modeled it after. I don't think anybody's gonna argue that. And that brings us to the star of today's Game Over episode, Final Blaster. This is a PC Engine shooter that came out in 1990 and never found its way west. Once again, it's a vertical shooter like Blastoff, but at least this time they attempt to piece a story together. Is the future, and those pesky Bosconians have waged war on all of mankind. It's up to an experimental starfighter known as the Blaster Mark II Phoenix to dismantle the enemy forces one level at a time. What we quickly discover is that the Bosconian forces have been building superpowered humanoids. And if that doesn't work, they have a backup plan that involves infecting the planet with alien plants and foliage. It all ends with an epic battle against one of the most ghoulish shoot-'em-up bosses I've ever seen. Having destroyed the cloning devices and sent the enemy's technology all the way back to the Stone Age, this is what happens next. Oh, and don't forget to stick around for the post-credits scene. For a game that barely has a story, Final Blaster has a surprisingly effective ending. All the stuff before the credits is fine, if not expected. However, it's what comes after the names fly by that actually matters. This is one of the very few games that takes a moment to honor the pilots and soldiers that sacrificed their lives to stop the Bosconians. Look, it's rare for a video game to address the consequences of war, and this simple shoot-'em-up is more than up for the task. And you know what? It works as the perfect sign-off for the series, which really did end with Final Blaster. The name wasn't lying. While the action is fun and the bosses are cool, I think that this game should forever be remembered for its fantastic post-credits scene. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Game Over, the early years. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes almost every week. In fact, there's a whole playlist with more than 170 of these episodes, so you should definitely go and check that out. Now, here's the question I have for you. Should games have more post-credit scenes? Look, guys, I'm not saying that games don't have these extra moments. I mean, Hideo Kojima has turned the post-credit scene into an art form. I'm just saying that it hasn't been embraced in the same way as blockbuster movies. Should we see more of that in gaming? Let me know in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with an episode of EGM Ranks looking at a completely misunderstood console. Yeah, you'll find out what system soon enough, so in the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.